How do you build a strong emergency fund and save your first 10,000? 45% of adults cannot cover an emergency worth of 1,000. Imagine your car breaks down or you lose your job. Without savings, you're left scrambling. So today, I will walk you through how to save your first 10,000. This comprehensive guide will help you to build a financial safety net so that you're not worried about finances ever again. My name is Anna, I'm an aspiring fintech UX designer, and let's dive right into it. What is an emergency fund and why do you need it? An emergency fund is basically a stash of money set aside for life's unexpected curveballs, medical bills, car repairs, job loss, and etc. You don't want to go into debt, and you definitely don't need all the anxiety and stress from lack of money on top of everything else happening in your life during an emergency. So build an emergency fund. The next thing I want to cover is where to keep your emergency fund. You've probably heard of different bank accounts like checking, saving, and investment. Keep your emergency fund in high yield, easily available savings account. Thanks to the inflation, money loses value over time. Remember how 5 years ago you could buy a coffee and a croissant for $3, and now the same coffee and the same croissant costs you $5. That's inflation. If you just leave your money in a checking account, over time, you lose. A savings account works in a way that you give the money to the bank and then the bank uses your money to invest and make more money. As a thank you, banks offer an interest rate, a small portion of money the bank earned from the investment. You want to find an account that offers you a decent interest rate that at least matches the inflation. However, it has to be easily available because in case of the emergency, you should be able to access those money quickly. I will cover specific steps when building an emergency fund a little bit later in the video, but first, I want to address 3 biggest challenges people face when just starting. First of all is the psychological barrier of starting from scratch. When you have zero in your bank account, starting an emergency fund can truly seem out of reach. So I want to tell you about the concept of valley of disappointment. This graph here represents our perception of how our effort relates to time. We think that our progress will look like this, a nice linear correlation. In reality, it will look more like this, an exponential relation. This is especially true in finance because savings work on compound interest, which is literally an exponential function. This area here is where it will seem that you're making no progress and none of what you do matters. That's why it's called the valley of disappointment. I genuinely found that just knowing about this concept builds more self-awareness and shifts your perspective from feeling stuck to actually making progress. Just start. Build up patience and dedication. Keep going despite the voices in your head. Second biggest challenge is debt. Debt can be very discouraging, but it's not the death sentence. Learn the ins and outs of your loan and create a specific plan to pay it off. It's always a good idea to meet with financial advisor if your debt is way too overwhelming. If you have any high interest loans, make paying them off your number 1 priority before you start any savings. The third biggest challenge is the temptation to spend. This one is probably the trickiest one. In the world where we are constantly exposed to someone else's idea of financial success, so many of us has grown up with the belief that wealth lies in the latest designer bags, sport cars, and working from Bali. That combined with a cheap fast fashion and sneaky marketing techniques puts us on a never-ending cycle of keeping up with trends. I want you to be very honest with yourself. Are you buying this latest thing because it makes your authentic self truly happy? Or are you just seeking social approval? I have a whole video on my channel about impulse buying and how to stop this toxic behavior. So if that's something you're struggling with, I think you will benefit greatly from this video. And finally, let's talk about actionable steps it takes to build an emergency fund. It's recommended to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses covered in your emergency fund. Therefore, start by calculating how much you're spending on essentials each month. I live in Toronto and the average monthly expenses here are 2,000. So the ideal emergency fund for me would be 6 to 10,000 Canadian dollars. Break your big goals into smaller ones, like 1,000 or even 500, and focus on achieving those small targets. Everything else will fall into its places. The next thing I would recommend doing is automating your savings. Adopt a mindset of paying yourself first. Sure, cover your basic human survival needs first, but before giving away your money to anyone else, give them to your future self. Set automatic or direct deposits on your payday. This way you will invest in your emergency fund before even having a chance to spend those money on anything else. Next step is unavoidable, and it's adjusting your lifestyle. If you're used to living from paycheck to paycheck, starting an emergency fund can feel weird and difficult because it means changes in your everyday actions. But I want you to remember that saying no opens up the doors for new, more meaningful yeses. I want you to look at your spendings and see what makes you truly happy. What regrets do you have? Cut the unnecessary expenses and redirect those money to savings. I know you may not believe me now, but trust me, things like traveling, moving into a new apartment, and not being forced to take loans bring so much more happiness to your life than getting a food delivery every single night. The last step is the most enjoyable one. Track your progress. Our brains just love putting check marks next to the goals and seeing your balance grow. Review your bank statements constantly. Alternatively, you can use budgeting apps like You Need a Budget or Buddy, as well as spreadsheets. There is nothing more enjoyable than seeing your balance grow and feeling more and more confident in yourself. If you ever use the money from the emergency fund, just refill it afterwards whenever you have a chance, so it stays at the 3 to 6 months value. I hope it gives you a comprehensive starting point for your savings and emergency fund journey. If you want to secure your financial future, start making changes today. As I mentioned many times before, impulse buying is the biggest leak in your wallet. I do have a video on my channel about it. There I go into depths of this toxic behavior and cover a bulletproof strategy to stop it. Thank you so much for investing in your financial future. You are on the right path. Stay curious and see you in the next video.